Emery Sullivan, 34, stared at her parents across the dining table, their ultimatum still ringing in her ears. Sell your house to Vanessa at half price, or consider yourself disowned. The home she'd worked 80-hour weeks for years to afford. The home her perfect sister's CEO husband wanted for their vacation property. The home that, unbeknownst to her family, already held secrets that would tear their picture-perfect facade apart forever. Hey everyone! Before I dive deeper into how my own family tried to steal my dream home, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if this family betrayal resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about karma coming full circle. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how justice was served in this family revenge drama. For as long as I could remember, there had been two distinct realities in the Sullivan family: the pristine, enviable image we projected to the world, and the harsh truth that existed behind closed doors. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Sullivan, had built their reputation in our affluent Massachusetts community as the epitome of success. He as a prominent attorney, she as the perfect homemaker who chaired every important charity committee in town. Then there were their daughters. Vanessa, the golden child, 3 years my senior Yale graduate, married to Maxwell Thompson, the youngest CEO in the history of New England's largest real estate development firm. And then there was me, Emery, the perpetual disappointment, who had rejected the law school path my father had mapped out for me to pursue architecture. Drawing buildings my father had scoffed is hardly a profession worthy of the Sullivan name. What my family didn't understand, or perhaps chose not to acknowledge, was that I had found genuine passion and purpose in my work. Over the past decade, I had built my own architectural firm from the ground up, specializing in sustainable urban housing. My projects weren't glamorous mansions for the wealthy, like the ones Maxwell's company developed, but affordable, environmentally conscious homes that actually made a difference in people's lives. 3 years ago, after saving every penny and working myself to exhaustion, I had finally achieved my dream, purchasing a historic Victorian home on Maple Ridge, a charming street in our hometown of Westfield. The house needed substantial renovation, but that was part of its appeal to me. I could see past the peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards to what it could become: a testament to preservation and modernization coexisting in harmony. Every weekend and evening after work, I poured my heart into restoring that house. I stripped layers of paint to reveal original woodwork, painstakingly repaired stained glass windows, and brought the once neglected garden back to life. My home became my canvas, my greatest personal project. More importantly, it became my sanctuary away from my family's constant criticism and comparisons. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Vanessa and Maxwell lived in a 7,000 square foot contemporary mansion, a cold, sterile showplace designed to impress, they had become fixated on my modest Victorian. Maxwell had mentioned casually at several family gatherings how the Maple Ridge neighborhood was up and coming and a smart investment opportunity. I had smiled politely each time, never imagining that his interest was anything more than professional curiosity. At family dinners, which had become increasingly tense affairs, my parents would lavish praise on Vanessa and Maxwell's latest acquisitions: their new yacht, their vacation home in the Hamptons, the private school they had selected for their 4-year-old twins. My accomplishments, in contrast, were met with faint acknowledgement, at best outright dismissal, at worst. Emery restored the original 1,890 fireplace in her home, my mother would say, with a tight smile before quickly pivoting. But Vanessa, tell everyone about the infinity pool Maxwell is having installed. It's going to be featured in Architectural Digest. I had grown accustomed to this dynamic over the years, finding my worth outside the confines of family approval. I had close friends, genuine people who valued me for who I was rather than my pedigree or portfolio. I had clients who respected my vision and ethics. And I had my house, a physical manifestation of everything I believed in. What I didn't have was any inkling of the storm that was brewing, the familiar pattern of family dynamics about to shift into something far more insidious. I had no idea that my parents and sister had been discussing my home, my private sanctuary, behind closed doors. No idea that they had already decided its fate without any consideration for my feelings or the years of work I had invested. The first hint that something was amiss came 2 weeks ago, when Maxwell showed up unannounced at my door on a Sunday morning. His gleaming Range Rover looked out of place, parked in front of my modest home, his crisp polo shirt and pressed khakis, a stark contrast to my paint-splattered overalls. "Just in the neighborhood, and thought I'd stop by to see the famous restoration project," he said, with that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Mind if I take a look around?" Against my better judgment, I had let him in, even proudly showing him the original architectural details I had uncovered and preserved. He had nodded, making appreciative noises in all the right places, but something about the calculating look in his eyes made me uneasy. He seemed to be assessing, measuring, evaluating, not as an admiring brother-in-law, but as the ruthless businessman I knew him to be. As he was leaving, he paused on my porch. "You know, if you ever decide to sell, I hope you'll come to me first. This place has potential." "I'm not selling," I had replied firmly. "This is my home." His smile had tightened just a fraction. "Everyone has a price, Emery. It's just a matter of finding it." I had dismissed the encounter, chalking it up to Maxwell's typical condescension. Little did I know that it was merely the opening move in a carefully orchestrated game where I was meant to be the loser. A game that would reach its climax at my parents' house just 1 week later, with an ultimatum that would change everything. The Sullivan family dinner was a monthly ritual that felt more like a performance review than a family gathering. We would assemble at my parents' colonial mansion on the first Sunday of each month, dressed in our Sunday best to maintain the illusion of familial harmony. This particular Sunday started no differently than the others, my mother fussing over the table settings, my father discussing the stock market with Maxwell, and Vanessa showing me photos of her twins' recent ballet recital with the smug satisfaction of someone who believes they've won at life. I had arrived bearing a bottle of my father's favorite scotch, a peace offering of sorts after our last heated exchange about my refusal to take on a lucrative but ethically questionable project for one of his clients. The evening progressed, predictably, subtle digs about my single status, pointed questions about my business's growth that were framed as concern, and the usual parade of Vanessa's accomplishments. "Maxwell just closed the Thompson Heights development," my father announced proudly as we settled into the main course. 30 luxury condominiums, all sold before construction was even completed. "That's impressive," I said, automatically the expected response in our carefully choreographed family dynamic. "And at $3 million each," Vanessa added, patting her husband's hand. "The company's stock has jumped 15% since the announcement." My mother beamed. "You've always had such a good head for business, Maxwell, just like Richard." I pushed my food around my plate, accustomed to these conversations that inevitably highlighted the perceived gap between my sister's life choices and my own. I was preparing my standard exit strategy, a fabricated early morning meeting, when my father cleared his throat in a way that immediately set off warning bells. "Emery," he began, setting down his fork with precision, "your mother and I have been discussing your situation." My stomach tightened. In our family, discussions were never simply discussions, they were conclusions reached without my input, presented as foregone decisions. "My situation," I repeated cautiously. "Yes," my mother interjected, her voice taking on that falsely sympathetic tone she used when delivering what she considered necessary truths. "Darling, we're concerned that you've overextended yourself with that house of yours." "My house is fine," I said, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. "The restoration is coming along exactly as planned." Maxwell chuckled, the sound grating against my nerves. "It's a money pit, Emery. You've sunk what, 200,000 into renovations already? On a street that's hardly prime real estate. Maple Ridge is a historic district, I countered, heat rising to my face. And the renovations have actually increased the property value significantly. Which is precisely why now is the perfect time to sell, my father stated, as if the matter were already decided. Maxwell has generously offered to purchase the property from you. I blinked, trying to process what was happening. I'm not selling my house. Be reasonable, Emery, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with condescension. The twins need more space to play when they visit Grandma and Grandpa. Maxwell's offer is more than fair. Your sister and Maxwell are offering 700,000, my mother added, as if this would settle the matter. The actual market value of my home after all the renovations was closer to 1.4 million, a fact they all had to know. That's half its worth, I said flatly. It's a family discount, Maxwell replied with that shark-like smile. We're keeping it in the family. The family has nothing to do with my house, I said, setting down my napkin. I'm not selling, especially not at half the market value. My father's face hardened into the expression I'd seen countless times when he was preparing to close a difficult negotiation. Emery, you're being obstinate. This arrangement benefits everyone. Your sister's family gets a suitable property, and you get relief from a financial burden that's clearly beyond your means. My finances are none of your concern, I replied, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. And my house is not a burden, it's my home. I've put my heart into that place. Oh, for heaven's sake, my mother sighed. It's just a house. There are plenty of other houses. Not to me, I insisted. Why is this suddenly so important? Maxwell and Vanessa already have 2 homes they barely use. The Maple Ridge location is perfect for our needs, Maxwell stated coldly. It's 5 minutes from your parents in a neighborhood that's appreciating rapidly. It makes financial sense. Then pay market value for a different house in the neighborhood, I challenged. A heavy silence fell over the table. My father exchanged glances with Maxwell, then with my mother, in that wordless communication that had always excluded me. Finally, he placed both hands flat on the table, a gesture that signaled he was about to deliver his final position. Emery, he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone, your mother and I have always supported you, even when you chose to pursue this architectural whimsy instead of a respectable legal career. We've tolerated your stubborn insistence on making your own way, despite how it reflects on the family. I opened my mouth to object, but he held up a hand to silence me. We're not asking any more, he continued. We're telling you. Sell the house to your sister and Maxwell at the price they've offered, or consider yourself no longer part of this family. The room seemed to tilt sideways. You're disowning me, over a house, over your continued selfish refusal to put family first, my mother corrected, her lips pursed in disapproval. Vanessa has always made sacrifices for this family. It's time you did the same. I looked at my sister, expecting to see at least a flicker of discomfort at this blatant manipulation. Instead, she sat smugly beside her husband, the satisfied expression of someone who always got what she wanted. This is insane, I said, pushing back from the table. You're trying to bully me into selling my home at half its value to your golden child who already has everything. Don't be so dramatic, Vanessa sighed. It's a fair offer, considering all the work it still needs. Work that I've been doing myself, I shot back. Work that has transformed that house into something special. You have until the end of the month to accept the offer, my father said with finality. After that, we'll consider the matter closed, along with your place in this family. I stood, my legs surprisingly steady, given how violently my heart was pounding. Then I guess we're closed. Because I will never sell my home to people who would stoop this low to get what they want. Emery, my mother gasped. You don't mean that? I absolutely do, I replied, surprising myself with the calm conviction in my voice. And for the record, I'm not the one tearing this family apart. You three are doing a perfectly good job of that all by yourselves. I walked out of my parents' house that night with a strange mixture of rage and relief washing over me. As I drove home to my beloved Victorian that had suddenly become the center of a family war, I realized that some part of me had always been waiting for this moment. The moment when the thin veneer of family loyalty would finally crack, revealing the conditional nature of their love. What I didn't realize then was that this ultimatum wasn't just the culmination of years of family dynamics, it was about to unearth secrets that had been buried for decades. Secrets that would make a house on Maple Ridge seem like an insignificant detail in a much larger, more devastating picture. 3 days after the disastrous family dinner, I still couldn't shake the hollow feeling in my chest. I had always known where I stood in the family hierarchy, but to have it stated so baldly, to be told that my place at the table was contingent upon surrendering something I loved to my already privileged sister, was a different level of betrayal. I threw myself into work, accepting 2 new commissions and staying at the office until well past midnight. My employees noticed the shift in my demeanor, but knew better than to pry. By Thursday evening, physical exhaustion had finally caught up with emotional turmoil, and I dragged myself home with the intention of falling face first into bed. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a weathered Subaru parked on the street in front of my house. A woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair stood on my porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. She turned as my car lights swept across the yard, and something about her posture, a certain dignity despite her obvious discomfort, made me pause. "Can I help you?" I asked, approaching cautiously. "Are you Emery Sullivan?" Her voice had a slight tremor, but her gaze was direct, searching my face with an intensity that made me uneasy. "Yes, and you are?" "Margaret Caldwell," she replied, extending a hand that I automatically shook. "I worked for your father's law firm for nearly 30 years. I retired 5 years ago as his executive assistant." The name was vaguely familiar. I had a dim memory of a kind-faced woman who had once slipped me candy when I visited my father's office as a child. "It's nice to see you again, Miss Caldwell, but I'm afraid this isn't a great time. I know about Maxwell Thompson's plans for your property," she interrupted, her expression grave. "And I think there are things you need to know before this situation progresses any further." A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air ran down my spine. "How do you know about that?" She glanced around nervously. "Could we speak inside? This isn't a conversation for your front porch." Against my better judgment, I found myself unlocking my door and inviting this near stranger into my home. We settled in my living room, the half-finished restoration project still evident in the exposed beams and partially sanded floors. "It's a beautiful house," Margaret commented, her eyes taking in the high ceilings and ornate woodwork. "I can see why you've fought to keep it, Miss Caldwell," I said, my patience wearing thin. "How do you know about my family's disagreement, and why are you here?" She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture that seemed designed to steady herself. "For 30 years I was privy to most of your father's business dealings. I typed his correspondence, filed his documents, and scheduled his meetings. I was also required to sign a very comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, which I'm guessing you're about to violate by talking to me." A small sad smile crossed her face. "The NDA expired when I retired. And some things matter more than legal documents, Miss Sullivan." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a thick manila envelope. 2 days ago, I received a call from an old colleague still at the firm. She mentioned that your father was preparing documentation to remove you from his will and the family trust. She thought I might know why, given our previous history. "History?" I echoed, increasingly confused. Margaret's gaze dropped to the envelope in her hands. "Your father and I had a complicated relationship, Miss Sullivan. Professional on the surface, but there were moments when lines were crossed. Nothing ongoing, just indiscretions during particularly stressful cases." She looked up, her expression hardening. "Your mother was aware?" It was part of an arrangement they had. I sat back trying to process this revelation about my seemingly straight-laced parents. I don't understand what this has to do with my house or Maxwell. When I heard what was happening to you, I went to my safety deposit box and retrieved these. She placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. Copies of documents I held onto as for insurance. Your father was not always the ethical attorney he presented himself to be. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and began sifting through its contents. What I found sent my world tilting off its axis for the second time in a week. The documents detailed a complex web of transactions surrounding the development of a luxury condominium project called the Westfield Heights, a project spearheaded by none other than Maxwell Thompson's company 3 years ago. The same year I had purchased my home. I don't understand, I murmured, scanning the papers. This looks like a bribery and zoning fraud scheme, Margaret finished for me. Your father used his connections on the zoning board to push through variances for the Westfield Heights that should never have been approved. The building exceeded height restrictions, encroached on protected wetlands, and bypassed affordable housing requirements. In exchange, Maxwell Thompson ensured that your father received a significant but carefully disguised financial stake in the project. My mouth went dry as I continued reading. These environmental reports, they were falsified, Margaret nodded grimly. The original reports showed contamination levels that would have halted the project immediately. Your father helped suppress them and push through doctored versions. But people live in that building now, I said, horror dawning as I thought about the implications. If there's toxic soil, the danger was contained through expensive mitigation methods that cut deeply into the project's profits, which is why they've been so desperate to make up the difference with their next development. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. A development they plan to build on Maple Ridge. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. My house. They want to tear it down for another condo project. Not just your house, Margaret corrected. They've been quietly buying properties on your street for the past year. Your house is the final piece they need to move forward with their plans. I thought about Maxwell's sudden interest in my home, the convenient timing of my parents' ultimatum. But why force me to sell at half price? Maxwell's company could afford to pay market value. Margaret's expression was pitying. Because the Westfield Heights project nearly bankrupted them. The environmental remediation, coupled with some other investments that went south, Thompson Development is on the edge of collapse. This new project is their Hail Mary pass, but they need it to be extremely profitable, which means acquiring the land as cheaply as possible. And my family is helping them do that, I said bitterly. Using emotional blackmail to force me out of my home so they can demolish it for condos. Your parents have more than emotional investment in this, Margaret said, pointing to a particular document. They've personally guaranteed some of Maxwell's business loans. If his company goes under, they stand to lose a significant portion of their retirement savings. I sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the magnitude of this betrayal. My family wasn't just choosing my sister over me, they were actively conspiring to destroy my home for their financial benefit. And in the process, they had engaged in fraud, bribery, and environmental cover-ups. Why are you showing me this? I finally asked, looking up from the damning paperwork. Why risk getting involved? Margaret Caldwell's eyes held a steely determination that belied her otherwise grandmotherly appearance. Because 30 years ago I made the mistake of staying silent when I should have spoken up. I told myself it wasn't my place, that the ends justified the means. I watched your father cross ethical lines again and again, and I helped him cover his tracks, because I was complicit in other ways. She stood gathering her coat. I'm dying, Miss Sullivan. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I have perhaps 6 months left, and I've found that the prospect of death has a remarkable way of clarifying what matters. The truth matters. Justice matters. And sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about who stands up for what's right. As she moved toward the door, she turned back one last time. Those documents are copies. The originals are with my attorney, along with a sworn statement. What you do with this information is entirely up to you. But know this, if you decide to fight, you won't be fighting alone. After Margaret left, I sat in my half-finished living room until dawn broke, surrounded by papers that documented years of corruption and betrayal. The beautiful home I had poured my heart into was just collateral damage in a much larger, uglier game, one where the players included the very people who should have protected me. By morning, shock had given way to cold, clear determination. If my family wanted a war, they would get one. But it wouldn't be fought on their terms, and I would no longer be the only one with something to lose. The morning after Margaret Caldwell's visit, I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. My mind was racing with everything I had learned: the fraud, the conspiracy, the environmental cover-up, and most painfully, my family's central role in all of it. The documents Margaret had provided were compelling but complex, filled with legal terminology and financial jargon that I needed to understand completely before I could act. I spread the papers across my dining room table and began organizing them chronologically, creating a timeline of events that had led to this moment. As patterns emerged, so did my anger, pure clarifying anger that burned away the hurt and confusion I had felt at that family dinner. By mid-morning, I had made a decision. I needed professional help to navigate this, someone who understood the legal and financial implications of what I had discovered. I couldn't go to just any lawyer. Given my father's standing in the legal community, I needed someone with no connections to him or his firm. I remembered Julia Chen, a woman I had met at a sustainable architecture conference 2 years ago. She had left a corporate law practice to specialize in environmental law and corporate malfeasance. We had kept in touch sporadically, and I knew she had no ties to my father's circles. When Julia arrived at my house that afternoon, her sharp eyes took in the papers spread across my table and my exhausted appearance. "When you said it was urgent, I didn't realize I'd be walking into the setup for a legal thriller," she commented, setting down her briefcase. "Start from the beginning, Emery. Leave nothing out." For the next 3 hours, I walked her through everything from my family's ultimatum to Margaret Caldwell's revelations. Julia took meticulous notes, occasionally stopping me to clarify a point or examine a particular document more closely. "This is substantial," she finally said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "If these documents are authentic, and I have no reason to doubt they are, your father, brother-in-law, and potentially others could be facing serious charges. Securities fraud, environmental violations, bribery of public officials. This goes beyond civil liability into criminal territory." My stomach clenched. Despite everything, hearing it laid out so starkly made the situation suddenly terrifyingly real. "What do you think I should do?" Julia considered this carefully. "Before we take any irreversible steps, we need to verify everything. I have contacts who can confirm the environmental testing data. We also need to understand exactly what Thompson Development is planning for your neighborhood." "They've already given me a deadline," I reminded her. "The end of the month to accept their offer or be disowned." "Then we work quickly," she replied, her expression hardening. "But we also work smart. If we're going to confront them, we need to be absolutely certain of our facts." Over the next 2 weeks, Julia and I embarked on a thorough investigation. She connected me with environmental engineers who could interpret the soil testing reports from the Westfield Heights project. I used my professional contacts in the architecture and planning communities to gather information about Thompson Development's quiet property acquisitions on Maple Ridge. What we uncovered was even worse than I had initially feared. The contamination at the Westfield Heights site hadn't been fully remediated as claimed in the official reports. It had been contained in a way that experts described as temporary at best, negligent at worst. The residents had no idea they were living above soil that could potentially still pose health risks. Moreover, we discovered that Thompson Development had been using shell companies to purchase properties on Maple Ridge at below-market rates, often approaching elderly homeowners and pressuring them with limited-time offers. My house was indeed the final piece they needed, the central property that connected all their other acquisitions, and would allow them to build another luxury condominium complex similar to the Westfield Heights. They're planning to replicate the same model, Julia said grimly, as we reviewed a set of preliminary architectural plans she had obtained through a contact at the planning department. Same corner cutting, same environmental shortcuts. And your father's fingerprints are all over the permit fast-tracking. I stared at the rendering of the proposed development, a sleek modern building that would tower over the historic homes it didn't demolish. My house, with its lovingly restored Victorian details, would be erased as if it had never existed. We have enough now to at least slow them down, Julia continued, gathering her notes. We can file complaints with the EPA about the Westfield Heights remediation alert, the Historical Preservation Board about the Maple Ridge plans, and potentially approach the state bar about your father's ethical violations. But that's a long-term strategy, I pointed out. My deadline is in 4 days. Julia's expression softened with sympathy. Emery, I have to be honest with you. Going public with this will devastate your family financially and reputationally. Your father could be disbarred. Maxwell's company will almost certainly collapse. The fallout will affect your mother, your sister, even your niece and nephew eventually. Are you prepared for that? The question hit me like a physical blow. For all their flaws, these were the people who had shaped my life, who in their own twisted way I still loved. I thought about family holidays, my father teaching me to ride a bike, my mother nursing me through childhood illnesses, Vanessa protecting me from bullies when we were young. Then I thought about that dinner, the cold calculation in their eyes, as they demanded I sacrifice my home for their gain. I thought about the residents of the Westfield Heights unknowingly living above contaminated soil because my father and brother-in-law had decided their profit margins were more important than people's safety. I need to try one more thing before we go nuclear, I said finally. I need to give them one last chance to do the right thing. Julia looked skeptical, but nodded. Just remember, these people have already shown you who they are and what they're willing to do. Don't expect them to suddenly grow a conscience because you appeal to their better nature. It's not about their conscience, I replied, a plan forming in my mind. It's about making sure they understand exactly what they're risking. The next day I requested another family dinner, a last-minute gathering that my mother agreed to with obvious relief, clearly believing I was coming to accept their terms. Julia helped me prepare, coaching me on exactly what to say and how to respond to various scenarios. Margaret Caldwell provided one final piece of assistance: access to her personal email account, where years of correspondence with my father had been archived. As I drove to my parents' house that Sunday evening, the manila envelope on my passenger seat seemed to pulse with dangerous energy. I wasn't naive enough to believe this would end with tearful reconciliation, but I was determined that whatever happened, the truth would finally be exposed. All of it, not just the convenient parts my family had chosen to acknowledge. Hey everyone, I can feel your anticipation building just as the tension was mounting in my family drama. Before I continue with what happened at that fateful dinner, I'd love to know if you've ever had to confront family members about something serious. Drop a comment below about how you handled it. And if you're enjoying this journey of family betrayal and the quest for justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories where karma comes full circle. Now let's get back to the showdown I was about to have with my family. The familiar drive to my parents' house felt surreal, as if I were traveling toward a past that no longer existed. The colonial mansion where I'd grown up looked the same as always, imposing, perfect cold. My mother had clearly gone all out for this dinner, believing it to be a reconciliation. Through the dining room windows, I could see her best china laid out, candles, lit, flowers arranged in the crystal vase reserved for special occasions. I parked behind Maxwell's Range Rover and Vanessa's Mercedes, taking a moment to steady my breathing before gathering the manila envelope and my shoulder bag. Julia's words echoed in my mind: stay calm. Stick to the facts. Don't let them derail the conversation with emotional manipulation. My mother answered the door with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Emery, darling, we're so glad you came to your senses. Hello, Mother, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I think there's been a misunderstanding about why I wanted to meet. Her smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure as she ushered me into the dining room where my father, Vanessa, and Maxwell were already seated. My father stood as I entered, his expression a practiced mix of sternness and paternal authority. Emery, he nodded. I trust you're here with good news. I'm here with news, I answered carefully, remaining standing as I placed my bags on an empty chair. Whether you'll consider it good depends on your perspective. Maxwell glanced at his watch impatiently. Let's not drag this out with dramatics. Have you accepted our offer or not? Actually, I said, I have a counter offer to present. This caught their attention. Maxwell leaned forward with interest while my father's eyebrows rose slightly. We're listening, he said, gesturing for me to continue. I withdrew a document from my shoulder bag, a contract that Julia had helped me draft. I'll sell the house at market value, $1.4 million, as appraised last month, with several conditions attached to the sale. Conditions? Maxwell scoffed. You're hardly in a position to dictate terms. My first condition, I continued as if he hadn't spoken, is that the house and its historical features be preserved. No demolition, no major structural changes that would alter its character. Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Maxwell. That's not practical for our needs. My second condition, I pressed on, is that any development plans for Maple Ridge be submitted to rigorous environmental testing with the results made public. Third, that 20% of any future development be designated as affordable housing units. My father's face had darkened to a dangerous shade of red. This is absurd. You know full well that Maxwell's development plans require complete disregard for historical preservation, environmental safety, and community needs. I finished for him. Yes, I'm aware. Just as I'm aware of exactly how the Westfield Heights project was pushed through, despite significant environmental concerns. A heavy silence fell over the table. Maxwell's practiced smile had completely disappeared, replaced by a wary intensity. What exactly are you implying? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. Instead of answering directly, I opened the manila envelope and began laying out documents one by one on the dining table beside my mother's carefully arranged place settings. Soil testing reports from the Westfield Heights site showing dangerous levels of contaminants, followed by the doctored versions submitted to the EPA. I placed the papers side by side. Emails between Maxwell and the zoning board members who received suspiciously timed consulting fees shortly before approving variance requests. Another set of documents joined the first. Financial records showing my father's hidden interest in Thompson Development through a series of shell companies. My mother's face had gone pale. Vanessa looked confused, her gaze darting between her husband and my father, as if waiting for one of them to laugh and explain that this was all a misunderstanding. My father was the first to recover. Where did you get these? He demanded, his voice low and threatening. Does it matter? I countered. They exist, they're authentic. And copies are currently in a secure location, with instructions to be delivered to the EPA, the State Bar Association, and the Boston Globe if anything happens to me, or if you proceed with your plans to disown me. You're bluffing, Maxwell said, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. I pulled out my phone and played a recording, Margaret Caldwell's voice, calmly detailing her decades of knowledge about my father's ethical violations. "I've provided sworn testimony to accompany these documents," her voice stated clearly. "I have nothing to lose, Richard. But you and Maxwell have everything to lose." Maxwell lunged across the table, trying to grab the phone from my hand, but I stepped back quickly, ending the recording. "This is blackmail," he snarled, his charming facade completely gone now. "No," I corrected him. "This is negotiation. The same kind you and my father have engaged in for years, except I'm being transparent about my leverage." My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Emery, you have no idea what you're doing. The implications of these allegations aren't allegations if they're true," I interrupted. "And we both know they are." "You would destroy this family?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Over a house?" The hypocrisy of her question nearly took my breath away. "I'm not the one who made that choice, Mother. You and Father did when you decided my home was an acceptable sacrifice for Vanessa's benefit. When you threatened to disown me if I didn't comply." Vanessa, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "I didn't know," she said softly, looking at Maxwell with new eyes. "About the contamination, the bribes. I didn't know any of it." "Of course you knew," Maxwell snapped. "You just didn't want to know the details." The look of betrayal that flashed across my sister's face was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. "Almost. Here's my actual offer," I said, drawing everyone's attention back to me. "I keep my house. Thompson Development abandons its plans for Maple Ridge entirely. You establish a fund to properly remediate the Westfield Heights site and compensate the residents who've been living above contaminated soil. And you leave me and my life alone from this point forward." "That would bankrupt us," Maxwell said through gritted teeth. "Then perhaps you shouldn't have built your fortune on fraud and environmental negligence," I replied evenly. My father always, the negotiator, had composed himself enough to try a different approach. "Emery, let's discuss this rationally. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that satisfies everyone's interests without resorting to extreme measures." "I'm not interested in negotiations anymore," I told him, gathering the documents and returning them to their envelope. "I've presented my terms. You have until the end of the month, the same deadline you gave me, to accept them. After that, these documents go public." I turned to leave, but Vanessa's voice stopped me. "Emery, wait, please." I looked back at my sister, really looked at her perhaps for the first time in years. Beyond the perfect exterior, I could see confusion and hurt in her eyes. Not just about this situation, but about the entire framework of privilege and preferential treatment that had shaped our relationship from childhood. "Did you really not know?" I asked her quietly. She shook her head slowly. "I knew Maxwell was determined to develop Maple Ridge. I knew he and Dad wanted your house. But the rest of it," she glanced at her husband, then at our father, "how could you involve us in this without telling us the truth?" "It wasn't relevant," Maxwell dismissed. "Business dealings are complicated. You've never had to worry about the details before. Because you never gave me the chance." She shot back, a flash of anger surprising me. For a moment I glimpsed what might have been a sister who could stand up for herself, who might even have stood up for me if our parents hadn't spent decades pitting us against each other. "I'll be in touch for your answer," I said to no one in particular, then walked out of my childhood home, closing the door firmly behind me. In my car, I finally allowed myself to breathe deep, shuddering breaths that carried away some of the tension I'd been holding. I had done it. I had confronted them with the truth and offered them a way forward that wouldn't destroy them completely. Now all I could do was wait for their response and hope they would choose wisely. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly everything would unravel once the first thread was pulled. The week following the confrontation passed in a haze of anxious anticipation. I jumped every time my phone rang, half expecting to hear my father's voice offering surrender or threats. But the Sullivan family maintained radio silence. Even Vanessa, who had seemed on the verge of breaking ranks during our last encounter, made no attempt to contact me. Julia checked in daily, reminding me to stick to our plan and not reach out to them first. "They're hoping you'll get nervous and back down," she advised. Classic negotiation tactic. Don't give them the satisfaction. On Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing plans for a community center project when my assistant burst into my office without knocking, something she had never done in 3 years of working for me. "Emery, you need to see this," she said, breathlessly thrusting her tablet toward me. On the screen was a breaking news headline from the Boston Business Journal: Thompson Development CEO steps down amid investigation into financial irregularities. My stomach dropped as I scanned the article. According to anonymous sources, the board of Thompson Development had launched an internal investigation after concerns were raised about potential improprieties in the company's financial reporting and regulatory compliance. Maxwell had voluntarily stepped aside while the investigation proceeded. I immediately called Julia, who had already seen the news. "This wasn't us," she assured me when I asked if our evidence had somehow been leaked. "This is coming from inside the company." Someone got nervous and started talking. Over the next 72 hours, the situation escalated with breathtaking speed. The State Environmental Protection Agency announced it was reviewing permits for several Thompson Development properties, including the Westfield Heights. The Boston Globe published an exposé on questionable zoning decisions that benefited the company, naming several board members who had received consulting fees. And most damning of all, an anonymous whistleblower, not Margaret Caldwell as I initially suspected, provided documentation showing systematic fraud in the company's environmental impact statements going back nearly a decade. By Sunday, my father's law firm had issued a terse statement announcing his retirement for health reasons, effective immediately. The Boston Bar Association announced it was forming a committee to review certain permitting processes he had overseen. And Thompson Development's stock had plummeted so dramatically that trading was temporarily halted. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of vindication and sorrow. I hadn't wanted destruction on this scale, at least I told myself I hadn't. I had offered them a chance to make amends privately, to right their wrongs without public humiliation. They had chosen silence instead, and now forces beyond my control had taken over. On Monday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the family dinner where they had delivered their ultimatum, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Vanessa standing on my porch alone, looking nothing like the polished, confident sister I had grown up with. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face devoid of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a plain sweater. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. We settled in my living room, the scene of my conversation with Margaret Caldwell that had set everything in motion. "Maxwell's been suspended without pay, pending the investigation," she said, without preamble. "Dad's firm is distancing itself from him as fast as possible, claiming they had no knowledge of his personal activities. Mom's charity friends have suddenly discovered scheduling conflicts for all her events." She gave a bitter laugh. "It's amazing how quickly a social fortress can crumble." I didn't go public with what I knew, I told her, feeling a strange need to defend myself. "No," she acknowledged. "But you made them afraid enough to start covering their tracks, which only made everything look more suspicious. Once the first person started talking to save themselves, the rest followed like dominoes." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still happening, settling between us. "Did you know, the twins' private school called me yesterday?" Vanessa continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "They wanted to discuss our ongoing commitment in light of recent events. They're 4 years old, Emery, 4. And already they're being punished for their father's actions." Guilt twisted in my stomach. "I never wanted your children to suffer for this." Didn't you? She challenged, finally meeting my eyes directly. When you threatened to expose everything, what did you think would happen? That it would all be neatly contained to just the guilty parties. I had no answer for that. In my righteous anger, I hadn't fully considered the collateral damage, or perhaps I had, and decided it was an acceptable price for justice. I'm not here to blame you, Vanessa said, after a moment, her voice softening. God knows Maxwell and Dad made their own beds. I'm here because. She paused, seeming to struggle with what she wanted to say. Because you're the only family I have left who isn't in complete denial about what's happening. What about Mom? I asked. Vanessa's laugh was hollow. Mom is currently rewriting history in her mind. According to her new version of events, she never knew about any of Dad's questionable activities, and she's as much a victim as anyone. She's already planning her comeback as the wronged wife who stands by her disgraced husband while privately condemning his actions. That sounded exactly like our mother, always positioned to emerge from any disaster with her social standing intact, regardless of the truth. And Maxwell, I ventured. Vanessa's expression hardened. Maxwell is doing what he does best, looking for someone else to blame. The board, the regulators, disgruntled former employees. You. She met my gaze directly. Be careful, Emery. He knows you had those documents. He's convinced you orchestrated this whole thing to ruin him. A chill ran through me at her warning. Are you still standing by him? She shook her head slowly. I don't know. 20 years together, 2 children. It's not a simple decision. But I keep thinking about all those people in the Westfield Heights who have been living above poison because my husband decided profit margins were more important than their safety. For the first time in our adult lives, I felt a genuine connection with my sister, not the superficial bond our parents had enforced, but something real and fragile, built on painful honesty. What will you do now? I asked her. Protect my children, she replied without hesitation. Beyond that, I don't know yet. Maxwell's legal troubles are just beginning, and the family finances are in chaos. Dad apparently used his retirement fund to back some of Maxwell's more questionable projects, so that's gone. The house will probably have to be sold to cover legal fees. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it not for exposing the truth, but for the pain it was causing her and would continue to cause. Vanessa's smile was sad but genuine. You know what's ironic? That house they were so determined to take from you. It might be the only family asset that survives this mess. The only thing they couldn't touch because you refused to give it up. After Vanessa left, I walked through my beloved Victorian, running my hands over the woodwork I had restored, the stained glass, I had repaired the garden I had brought back to life. This house that had nearly torn my family apart had also in a strange way been my salvation. By fighting for it, I had discovered truths that might otherwise have remained buried forever. The coming months would bring more revelations, more legal battles, more painful reckonings. The full extent of my father and Maxwell's wrongdoing was still emerging, with new victims coming forward almost daily. I didn't know if my family would ever recover, if the wounds inflicted by decades of secrets and lies could ever truly heal. But standing in my home, the home I had fought for and won, I felt something unexpected taking root alongside the grief and anger, hope. Not for a perfect reconciliation or a return to what once was, but for something new and more honest, to eventually emerge from the ashes of what my family had been. The house on Maple Ridge had withstood more than a century of storms, of families coming and going, of joy and sorrow within its walls. It had survived because it was built on a solid foundation with materials meant to last. Perhaps I thought the same could be true of relationships, not the ones built on false pretenses and conditional love, but those constructed with honesty, respect, and the courage to stand firm when foundations are tested. As the afternoon light filtered through my restored windows, painting patterns across the floor, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever came next, I would face it with that same courage, that same integrity. It was, after all, the only way to build something that would truly last. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, I stood in my garden pruning roses as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn. The summer had been tumultuous, filled with legal depositions, press inquiries, and the ongoing implosion of Thompson Development. Now, as autumn approached, a tentative calm had settled over my life, not peace exactly, but something adjacent to it. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia Turn on Channel 5. "It's happening now." I hurried inside and switched on the television to see Maxwell on the courthouse steps surrounded by reporters. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking: Former CEO pleads guilty to fraud environmental violations." Maxwell looked nothing like the confident, polished brother-in-law who had once tried to bully me out of my home. His face was haggard, his designer suit hanging loosely on a frame that had lost considerable weight. As the cameras flashed around him, he read from a prepared statement, admitting to falsifying environmental reports, bribing officials, and knowingly endangering residents of the Westfield Heights. As part of my plea agreement, he concluded, his voice flat, "I will be cooperating fully with authorities in their ongoing investigation of these matters, including providing testimony regarding other parties involved." The implication was clear: my father would be next. According to Julia's sources, prosecutors had offered Maxwell a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony against the other architects of the scheme, primarily my father, but also several zoning board members and environmental inspectors who had looked the other way in exchange for favors. I switched off the television, not wanting to hear the legal analysts dissect what it all meant. I already knew. My brother-in-law was going to prison. My father would likely follow. The company that had borne the Thompson name for 3 generations was being dismantled by regulators and creditors. And somewhere in the wreckage were my sister and her children trying to salvage what they could of their lives. My doorbell rang, startling me from these thoughts. I opened it to find a courier holding a thick envelope. "Emery Sullivan," he confirmed, handing me the package after I nodded. "Delivery from Vanessa Thompson." Inside was a brief note in my sister's handwriting. "I found these in Maxwell's home office while packing up. I thought you should have them." Beneath the note were original architectural drawings of my house, dated 1892, showing the Victorian in its initial glory, along with detailed notes from the original builder. It was a priceless historical document for a preservationist like me, and a peace offering from the sister I had been at odds with for most of my life. I called her immediately. "Did you get them?" she asked in lieu of a greeting. "I did. Vanessa, they're incredible. How did Maxwell come to have them?" "He bought them at an estate sale years ago," she explained. Part of building his image as a developer who appreciated architectural history, even while he was demolishing historic buildings. The irony wasn't lost on him. He thought it was amusing. Something in her tone had changed since our last conversation, a new hardness perhaps, or simply the absence of illusions. "I saw the news," I said carefully. "Are you okay?" "Okay is relative," she replied, with a dry laugh. "I'm getting divorced from a man facing prison time while raising 2 children who keep asking where their father is. I'm selling a house I can no longer afford and moving in with our mother, who alternates between vodka-soaked self-pity and vicious blame-casting." She paused. "But I'm no longer lying to myself or anyone else, so in that sense, yes, I'm okay." The change in her was remarkable, painful to witness but also hopeful. The sister who had always taken the easy path, who had accepted our parents' favoritism and her husband's corruption without question, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more honest, more real. "How are the twins handling everything?" I asked. "Better than you might expect," she said, her voice softening at the mention of her children. "They're resilient. And they adore their new aunt, who builds amazing blanket forts and knows all about secret passages in old houses." This was a new development. After decades of strained relations, Vanessa and I had been cautiously rebuilding a relationship independent of our parents' influence. The twins, who had previously been kept at a distance from their unconventional aunt, were now regular visitors to my home. "Will you come to the hearing next week?" she asked, referring to our father's upcoming arraignment on multiple charges of fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels like I should be there, but another part doesn't want to watch his final humiliation," she finished for me. "I understand. I'll be there either way. Someone from the family should witness it, even if just to acknowledge the truth of what he did." After we hung up, I returned to my garden, to the roses that needed my attention regardless of the human drama unfolding around them. As I worked, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from the ultimatum that had seemed to signal the end of my place in the family, to this strange new reality, where I was perhaps the most stable Sullivan remaining. My parents had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most fundamentally about what constitutes strength in a family. They had believed it came from projecting perfection, from closing ranks against outsiders, from sacrificing individual integrity for collective advantage. In reality, their approach had built a house of cards that collapsed at the first strong wind of truth. The irony wasn't lost on me that my actual house, the one they had tried to take, stood stronger than ever, its foundation solid, its restoration nearly complete. In saving it, I had ultimately saved myself from remaining complicit in a family system built on lies and conditional love. 3 weeks later, another piece of the puzzle fell into place when I received a call from Margaret Caldwell's attorney. She had passed away peacefully, he informed me, but not before establishing a foundation with her modest estate. The Margaret Caldwell Truth and Reconciliation Fund would provide support for whistleblowers and victims of corporate malfeasance, with a particular focus on environmental justice. "She named you as one of the foundation's trustees," the attorney explained. "She said you understood the cost of standing up for the truth, and the value of building something better in place of what was broken." As autumn deepened into winter, the legal proceedings against my father concluded with a plea deal similar to Maxwell's, a significant prison sentence reduced in exchange for cooperation against even bigger fish in the corrupt ecosystem that they had inhabited. My mother, true to form, had already reinvented herself as a speaker on surviving betrayal at women's empowerment conferences, carefully omitting her own complicity in the family's ethical failures. Vanessa and the twins moved into a modest townhouse not far from my Victorian, using the proceeds from her divorce settlement after Maxwell's assets were largely seized. She had found work at a non-profit focused on sustainable urban planning, a field that both utilized her business acumen and allowed her to make amends in some small way for her former husband's environmental crimes. And my house on Maple Ridge. It became something I had never anticipated, a true family home again. Not in the traditional sense, but in a new configuration born from the ashes of what had been lost. Sunday dinners became a tradition with Vanessa and the twins as regular guests, along with friends who had stood by me through the darkest times. The dining room that I had meticulously restored echoed with children's laughter, honest conversations, and relationships built on genuine acceptance rather than performance and obligation. On the 1-year anniversary of that fateful ultimatum dinner, Vanessa brought a bottle of our father's favorite scotch, salvaged from the house our parents had been forced to sell. A toast she proposed as we stood in my kitchen to getting what you need instead of what you think you want. I raised my glass with a smile, recognizing the hard-won wisdom in her words. My family had wanted my house, believing it was just another asset to be acquired and controlled. What they had needed, what we had all needed, was the painful but liberating power of truth. In the end, I had kept my house but lost the family I was born into. Yet, from that loss had emerged something unexpected and precious. The chance to build new connections on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Not perfect, not without scars, but real in a way the Sullivan family facade had never been. As I looked around at the home I had fought for, I felt a deep sense of peace. The battle had been worth it, not just for the physical structure, but for what it represented. The courage to stand firm when pressure comes from those who should support you most. The strength to choose integrity over false harmony, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes losing what you thought you needed makes room for something better to take its place. My house on Maple Ridge stood as a testament to that journey, its weathered exterior sheltering a renewed interior, much like the woman who had fought to save it. Both of us scarred by the struggle, both ultimately stronger for having endured it. Hey everyone, as I wrap up my story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that ended up changing your life for the better? Or had a moment where standing your ground led to unexpected positive changes? Drop your experiences in the comments below. If this story of family, karma and justice served resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I share new stories about life's surprising twists every week. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need encouragement to stand firm in their own family battles. Thank you so much for listening to my journey from betrayal to unexpected blessings. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted makes room for what you truly need. Until next time.